Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special webinar entitled Assessing the Economic Impact of COVID-19 on Overseas Filipino Workers and the Philippines. We have as our speakers this afternoon and resource persons, three well-known and highly recognized policymakers and analysts with extensive background and experience in research on the sector of our overseas Filipinos, or our OFs, particularly our Overseas Filipino Workers, or OFWs. Given that our overseas Filipinos number around 10 million people now, or roughly 10% of our population, and in 2018, our OFWs numbered over 2 million, and the heavy reliance of many of our Filipino families and our Philippine economy on the remittances of our migrant workers, it is critical that we have a better understanding all around of the situation that our migrants face given this pandemic and what needs to be done or what can be done during and post-COVID to respond as adequately as possible to our OFWs. We are eager to listen and to learn more about what's actually happening to our overseas Filipinos and to look at the ways forward, rethinking about the future of the sector. This special webinar is brought to you by the COVID-19 Academic Crisis Response Consortium, which is a collaboration among the Ateneo Professional Schools, the DLSU Jesse M. Robredo Institute of Governance, and the AIM Stephen Zwelig School of Development Management in support of a whole-of-nation approach to fight COVID-19. The portal aims to be a one-stop shop that features COVID-19 Academic Crisis Response Consortium analysis, which is a collaboration among the Ateneos, and synthesis of local and international good practices that can be used to support public sector efforts. You may visit the portal at www.covid19arc.ph. The Academic Crisis Response Consortium has also organized two other previous webinars on the fight against COVID-19. The first one was Lessons from Taiwan, which took place last April 24, and the second was on Lessons from Israel, which took place in May 15. As was announced in the brochure, there are 4 questions and concerns that our speakers for this afternoon will seek to respond to. First, what are the economic effects of the pandemic crisis on our OFWs and the Philippine economy? Second, what are the socio-economic challenges that our government faces in the reintegration of OFWs because of this pandemic? Third, what are the socio-economic programs that government must prioritize to support the economy? Our speakers for this afternoon will seek to how will the COVID-19 crisis reshape labor migration, and how should government what are the economic effects of the pandemic crisis on our After OFWs all the 3 speakers have presented, we will open up the floor. What are the socio-economic challenges that our government may send your questions in the reintegration of OFWs speakers because of this pandemic? Thank you very much. Third, so let's begin what this are the socio-economic programs that government must prioritize to support the economy. Dr. Ang is a professor of the Economics Department of the Ateneo de Manila University. How will the COVID-19 and a senior fellow of the Ateneo Migration? And he's currently the director of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. After all the 3 speakers have presented, on the board of the Open Economic Society for questions and comments. After serving as president, you may send your questions ahead and he previously served as the director of the research cluster. Thank you very much. For cultural, educational, and social issues at the University of Santo Tomas. Dr. Alvin Ang. He has done extensive research and is a professor of the Economics Department of the Ateneo de Manila University in regard to remittances, and a senior fellow of the Ateneo Local Economic Development. He's currently the director of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development, or ASR, and went to the National University on the board of the Philippine Economic Society in public policy, serving as president in 2013. He graduated from Osaka University. He previously served as the director of the research cluster. Dr. Ang, for cultural, educational, and social issues at the University of Santo Tomas. He has done extensive research and written on migration issues in the Philippines, particularly in regard to remittances, hometown associations, and local economic development. Dr. Ang finished his BA in Economics at the University of Santo Tomas and went to the National University of Singapore for his master's degree in public policy. He graduated from Osaka University with a PhD in applied economics. So, Dr. Ang, please. There seems to be. Are you okay? Thank you.
Hey, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Sorry about that.
No, that's no problem. Please go ahead.
That's part of this new environment where we are. Right. Thank you very much, Tina, for that kind introduction. Let me also welcome my fellow panelists, Dr. Marla Asis and Yusek Rosie Dillon. Just some correction, I'm not anymore part of the PES board. That I was part of PES a long time ago, but still a member. Let me now share with you my presentation for this afternoon. Is it coming in? Can you see it? Okay. Okay, so my presentation is about the economic impacts of the pandemic to OFWs and remittances. Essentially, I'm going to share with you things from the two policy briefs that my colleague and longtime research collaborator Jeremiah Opiniano and I had done. One in early in April, and then another one about 3 weeks ago. Both talking about the impact of the COVID on the OFWs. Let me begin by looking at the initial estimates of the ILO in regard to how many people are affected by this COVID crisis in relation to jobs, and they said there are about 305 million full-time jobs affected, and 1.6 billion informal workers are at risk of losing livelihoods. Notice that in this chart and this chart that the ILO presented, you can actually look at this in their website, and you will find different sectors that are at risk, and most of them are actually in the services sector. The second challenge of the COVID crisis, and where it was originally making a big impact, was on the tourism sector, and the estimate of the UN World Tourism Organization is that tourism receipts at best could go back to 2004 level. And this is quite alarming, since tourism plays a major role in many countries' economic development. Another implication of the COVID has to do with the crude oil prices around the world, and I'm just showing you a chart that was as of end May.
Excuse me, Alvin.
Yes?
Excuse me, Alvin. Your PowerPoint doesn't seem to be moving, or is that my screen? Can you please check?
Oh, it's not moving.
Still on the title page.
Okay, let me fix that. Okay, I'll just use it from this perspective. It's okay? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not when it's done by sharing, it's not working. So I'm going to just show it by this way. But anyway, you can see it. As I was saying earlier, one of the challenges of the COVID is affecting tourism, and then the impact on labor is large and affecting about 305 million workers around the world already, as of the latest data from the ILO. And one of the challenges of the COVID crisis actually crude oil prices. I'm highlighting it because in the last few months, the oversupply of oil because of low demand had pushed the prices of oil down significantly. Was the time when we started to write the first policy brief in early April, where oil, in fact, in the U.S. Turned negative. Our challenge with the falling oil prices is that, as you can see in the next slide, is that many OFWs are in the Middle East, and this is data coming from our colleagues from the World Bank in the MENA region, showing us that many of the countries are heavily dependent on oil. As you can see, the oil prices will pull down income of these countries, and many of them will have a significant decline in income, including Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, Oman, Saudi, and UAE, where a lot of Filipinos are based. If you look at the PSA SOF survey of overseas Filipinos, you can find that about 55% of Filipinos are in the Middle East. And last April, we estimated that probably because of the huge number of Filipinos in that region, about 400,000 overall can be sent back home. And we don't want to be correct here, but it looks like we're heading towards that number. And also, if you look at the occupations that are primarily affected by the pandemic, you can see that mostly they are in the service sector, because the oil in particular is a product that is the main product of the Middle East. But basically, the value chain of oil has a lot of related industries, for example, in the services and sales in construction and elementary occupation. And you can see that about 40% of jobs are directly affected by the pandemic. And so I think it is still conservative to see that there's a possibility of remittances this year falling from about 10% to 20%. So 20% is also a possibility in this regard, and that would be the biggest decline in the last 20 years, because the last one we had a significant falling of remittances was during the Asian financial crisis, when a lot of domestic and the service workers in Asia lost their jobs. Also, my colleague Jeremiah Opiniano had pointed out to me that as early as last year, there were already signs of lower remittance from many countries, and this is highlighted in this chart. As you can see that already about 1.3 billion less were sent by these countries overall prior to the current pandemic. So most likely there are other reasons for this. So if you add these adjustments that are happening in these countries and add to what is happening to us now, that could possibly reach a huge decline. And about the 20% decline in remittances is about $6 billion. In the Philippines, this was the latest data coming out from the April 2020 Labor Force Survey. You can see that the sectors that are affected by the crisis in the local labor force are also in the aspect of services. So many of them are in the services sector. So what we can see directly is that the jobs lost in the international markets are also the same jobs that are being lost locally prior to the current pandemic. So most likely just skip about the headlines. You're all able to see that in the newspaper for this. So our challenge with the declining remittances is that it will hit household consumption directly. Now, and this is also data from the from the Philippine Statistics Authority, showing us that the bulk of remittances, these are both foreign and domestic remittances in the country, a significant portion goes to basic household requirements. And so when this is hit by lower remittances or falling remittances, then the translation to household demand is also going to be substantial. We did not have an actual estimate of this. We are doing it in a third right now. So our estimate is that overall, not just counting the remittances per se, but also the local consumption, household consumption as a whole could have a double-digit decline in the second quarter of this year. And also, we note that many OFWs and their families, and this is from our research, and we know all of this, that money behaviors of migrants and their families is such that they try to save, but very minimal because of their level of financial literacy, particularly of the lower level migrants that have gone. And we know that the number of migrants that are in the lower level are more than those are in the professional field. So they are severely challenged because they are the ones that are losing the jobs right now. And if the kind of financial literacy household consumption as a whole would have double counted at the moment in the second quarter of this year. And also, we note that many OFWs and their families, and this is from our research, and we know all of this, that money behaviors of migrants and their families is such that they try to save, but very minimal because of their level of financial literacy, particularly of the lower level migrants that have gone. And we know that the number of migrants that are in the lower level are more than those are in the professional field. So they are severely challenged because they are the ones that are losing the jobs right now. And if the kind of financial literacy they have is counted at the moment, we look at the possibility that they may not have enough savings to ride them on for a year or two. So if the crisis goes on. So these are just a summary of the points that I'm putting together, and some comments as well. In the past, yes, the OFWs have saved us from international crisis, but for example, 2009 crisis, still remittances went up. But this one is unlikely to be the same because of the magnitude and the extent of the crisis of this global pandemic. Note also that many of the laid off OFWs are coming from the same sectors that are laid off here. So they have to come back here. They will add to the unemployment, particularly in the services sector. And to me, the solution of giving them alternative opportunities as entrepreneurs and livelihoods is not very easy because they are not automatic entrepreneurs. Most likely, what we need to do is to train them, to upskill or de-skill, and so that they will be adapted into the new normal. And also, if there is a chance, our foreign posts should try to negotiate for those who have lost their jobs but are still in the host countries, and maybe especially if the host countries are recovering faster than the rest, then we should try to negotiate that if they can be redeployed somewhere. And also, I think haven't heard of an integrated effort or collective effort by sending countries on how to manage this crisis. So probably the Philippines can take the lead as one of the biggest labor migrant sending country in the world. So maybe you want to talk to ILO and IOM in that regard. So I think that's all that I'd like to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alvin. And apologize for the lack of update on your biodata. Thank you so much for that very useful overview, macroeconomics of the effects of the pandemic on migration globally, on labor migration globally, as well as for our OFWs. No? So we would now proceed to our second presenter, Dr. Maruja Asis is director of the Scalabrini Migration Center, one of the well-known established research institutions and NGOs dealing with the issue of migration, which is based in Manila. She's a sociologist who has long been working on international migration and social change in Asia. Her areas of interest and research work include gender, family and migration, migration and development, and migration governance. She's editor of the Asian and Pacific Migration Journal and has authored numerous publications and has participated in many international conferences. Dr. Asis took up her BA in sociology from the University of the Philippines, where she also went for a master's degree in demography. She holds a doctorate in sociology from the Bowling Green State University with population studies and social change as her areas of specialization. Thank you. Marla, please.
Hello. Hello. Yes. Thanks very much, Tina, for that introduction. And I'd also first like to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of this webinar and for giving me an interesting but challenging assignment, and that is to reflect on the future of labor migration. It is a topic actually that I had been discussing with friends and colleagues in the migration circle because, of course, as Alvin had mentioned earlier and also in the introduction by Tina, labor migration is a huge part of Philippine society. But also globally, there's been a lot of reflections about the future of migration in general because of the massive impact on mobility, globally. If we just look back to the beginning of this year, in January of 2020, ours was a world of hyper mobility. And 3.5 months later, we were forced to live in a world of immobility. So for a country of migration like the Philippines, which is known as a major source country of workers and talents for the global labor market, the implications of this pandemic are very huge. So just to begin, let's see. Okay, yes. I have organized my presentation into 4 parts. I will begin with a discussion of the context, and then I move swiftly into some observations about labor migration trends even before the pandemic set in, and then discuss what are the immediate impacts of COVID-19 on labor migration from the Philippines, and then end with some observations and conclusions on the short-term labor migration prospects. I don't go so much into the long-term prospects because I think that's that's a riskier part. And in any case, the immediate impacts are also very important to address. So first of all, in our almost 50 years of massive and sustained labor migration from the Philippines, we have actually experienced various crises in the past. And one of the most important crises, I think, that also served as a point of reference on how we addressed crisis situations from there on was our experience with the Gulf War in 1991. Okay, actually, until COVID-19 came into the picture, The Gulf War of 1991 was an experience where we had to repatriate the largest number of overseas Filipino workers. So that was close to 30,000. And of course, there were other conflict-related crises that came up. We also, as Alvin had mentioned, experienced the financial crisis of 1997, and then again, another major economic crisis in 2008 and 2010. What's interesting about the previous crisis that we have experienced, including the crisis that involved disasters like the earthquake in New Zealand, also the earthquake in Japan, and also some health crisis in between, is that in the past, when there was a crisis, it was easy to imagine what would happen afterwards. No? It was easy to imagine how we can bounce out, no, from the situation. So, for example, even with a conflict related crisis like the 1991 Gulf War, it was relatively easy to think of resuming to what was the pre-conflict situation, because in fact, when we think of the post-reconstruction work that has to be done after a conflict or after a disaster, it could even create opportunities for further employment. But with COVID-19, again, this was also highlighted by Alvin, almost all destination countries are affected by the pandemic. So in terms of, in the past when our workers would return to the Philippines coming from a crisis, there was always the possibility that there could be other destination countries that they could go to or they could consider. So in fact, what was our experience in the past crisis was that even if local employment opportunities were offered to our repatriated workers as part of their options, there were really very few takers. Hindi masyadong pinapansin yung domestic employment options dito sa Pilipinas because people were of the mindset that they can always look for another destination to go to. No? And then, of course, in this situation, even the local employment situation is badly battered. No? As was suggested by Alvin, citing some information, we are looking at an employment of 8 million in the Philippines. So even the local domestic market, rather, the domestic market is not very promising either. So, just to say that this particular crisis is one that I would describe as a mega crisis because first and foremost, of course, it is a health pandemic, but the economic, social, and political dimensions of this pandemic are just unprecedented. No? And it's even threatening to become a humanitarian crisis in some regions in the country and also in some parts of the world. Okay, so moving on. Yes. But even before the pandemic set in, there were already some concerns and also some questions about our experience with labor migration so far. So we've had more than 40 years of large-scale sustained labor migration. So we started out with just about 36,000 in 1975. And then the labor migration story of the Philippines has been quite consistent in the sense that it is always an upward climb. No? The numbers just keep on increasing year after year. So we actually breached the 1 million mark in 2006, the 2 million mark in 2016, and after that it dipped to 1.8, 1.9 million a year. Okay, but as I had mentioned, even before the crisis, there were already some characteristics of labor migration from the Philippines that were also quite worrying. In fact, indeed, no Filipino workers are preferred by many foreign employers, but then the competition has also become very steep. No? So, and what is also quite interesting about the Filipino situation is that while foreign employers prefer Filipino workers, no, there's a tendency to prefer Filipino workers, but foreign employers and foreign companies are also finding it very costly to hire Filipino workers. Costly in terms of the salaries and also costly in terms of the processes that are involved in legally hiring Filipino workers. What we have also seen for many, many years already is that when we speak, for example, about 1.8 million Filipinos leaving the country, actually a large part of the 1.8 or 1.9 million Filipinos are comprised of rehires, which means to say that the idea of our labor migration as temporary is becoming de facto permanent migration, or actually permanent overseas employment. And also the characters, although the Philippines is a source country of different types of talents and workers, but actually for many, many years already, a huge share of OFWs are actually in the less skilled occupations. Even if there was an attempt by the government to lower the deployment of domestic workers, actually after 2007, 2008, there was just a resurgence of our new hires being dominated by domestic workers. And part of the concerns also about our labor migration experience is that perhaps there's a lot of de-skilling that is involved. Okay, so I move on now to the immediate impacts of COVID-19 on labor migration. First, we talk about the situation in destination countries. No? So there has been displacement of OFWs except for a few destinations, and one of those exceptions would be Taiwan. And I think one of the exceptions also would be New Zealand, but New Zealand is not really a major destination country for OFWs. And we see also displacement in sectors, specifically in the leisure and hospitality sector. So this would include those working on the cruise ships and also hotels, restaurants, and retail. The figure that was cited by Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello was the displacement of some 300,000 OFWs that have been affected by COVID. But later on, I also saw some reports indicating that actually this figure includes the displaced, the stranded, as well as the infected. So sometimes we have to do something more about our data. And of course, even for those who were able to retain their jobs, there's a lot of concern, as what happened also in the past crisis, that they could be working on shorter hours, they could have lower wages, and again, the working conditions could not be as favorable as before. And then there's the situation of those that are stranded overseas. They are unable to return because of travel restrictions in destination countries. No? So, for instance, seafarers that are used to having a crew change every 10 months, some of them have to be on some of them, their contracts were extended because there was no possibility for a crew change. No? And also seafarers being stranded in transit countries as well. Of course, there was an increased demand for nurses, but then the demand was also not realized, among others, because of the POEA governing board resolution that restricted the deployment of new hires. So there was a lot of hoopla about this as well. There is an increased demand for seafarers, but then again, their mobility is also very much restricted. When we turn to the situation in the Philippines, for the very first time, there was the POEA report sometime in May that suggested that there was a 99% drop in deployment. Of course, that's not really surprising given the stalled mobility of people. And then, of course, we had to deal with the situation of workers who were stranded in the Philippines. Who were the stranded workers? This included those who were about to leave with contracts but were unable to leave because of travel restrictions. Okay, and then, as I mentioned earlier, there was the case of the nurses who were restricted from leaving, particularly if they were new hires. So it was only the nurses with existing contracts and who were returning to their destinations that were allowed to go home. We have also seen now the largest repatriation of OFWs ever. So I think the latest report that I saw was something like 55,000, more than 55,000 that were repatriated as of June 7, 2020. And as you can see from the slide, there are more sea-based sector workers that were repatriated compared to the land-based. And most of these sea-based sector are actually those who were working on cruise ships. So again, we have to deal with the reintegration challenges for those who have already been back in the Philippines, and that will be the topic of USEC De Leon. So let me just share a few findings from a survey of repatriated workers that we had conducted. So this is in cooperation with AOS Manila, SMC, and the Negrense Marine Integrated Services Incorporated. So it was a survey of 285 repatriated workers. So the primary reason for their repatriation, for half of them, more than half of them, it was because they lost their jobs. So they were displaced. And as you can see, the conditions, what were their economic conditions upon their return? Earlier, Alvin was saying that, many of the repatriated workers or the returnees, maybe their families could survive to about a year. But this is even a lot more worrying because of the unpreparedness of our OFWs and the suddenness of what happened in the pandemic. So about 60% of them have no savings at all. And only about 31% had some or enough savings who could say that their family would be in an okay situation. And actually only 6.4% said that they had enough savings and they could consider returning home for good. When we asked them about their plans in the next 3 months, again, 1 in 5 said that they didn't know. They had no idea what they're going to do. I think what's important here to highlight here is that 16% each said that they would spend time with their family, 16% said that they would look for local employment, and 16% said that they would still look for overseas employment. I think for the first time we are seeing a lot more people interested in trying to find ways whether they can look for employment in the Philippines. Now, when we jump into the future, okay. Again, the major question is, when is the post-pandemic period? When is it going to end? So when we think about that question, I think most people really anticipate the development of the vaccine, of a vaccine, as signifying what could be the end of this pandemic. I'm not quite sure that the vaccine could actually address many issues. So it could address one issue, but generally not. In a sense, this pandemic has also far-reaching implications. I think of it as like another version, although another version of how, for example, 9/11 in 2001 fundamentally changed travel, international travel in particular, and even affected the discourse on migration by bringing up the securitization issue. Okay, so with this pandemic, as I had mentioned at the very beginning, it really halted global migration and global mobility. And what is also part of the characteristics of this pandemic is really the fear factor. So that's why maybe even after a vaccine has been developed, we would still have minimal contact that would still be encouraged by as part of our day-to-day life, and there would still be physical distancing. And in particular, there would be a different type of securitization, and that is I guess what others observers had also called as health securitization. And this has larger and longer implications even after a vaccine has been discovered. So most likely there will still be mobility restrictions, there will still be border closures, and in a sense, travel is not going to be as fun as it was in the pre-pandemic days. And I think when we think about labor and supply of workers in the global labor market, we also have to consider that there is a tendency from here on until, I guess, in the next 5 years, a reliance on essentials. And that would have implications on the demand for workers in the global labor market, even if this pandemic has also taught us that migrant workers play a very important role in the economies of the world, not only in the sending countries, but also in the destination countries. What could happen to deployment levels? I think there would be a decline in deployment, although there would be continuing demand for workers in certain sectors, but not at pre-pandemic levels. So this would mean continuing demand for healthcare professionals, especially nurses. There could be an increased demand for manufacturing workers, particularly for those producing essential goods. There would be different trends in the sea-based sector. There would be a continuing decline in the cruise ship industry. There could be continuing demand for seafarers in merchant marine vessels. And there could be continuing demand for fishermen on foreign fishing vessels, although this is a rather small share of the sea-based sector. I would also say that maybe this time, unlike, for example, in the Asian financial crisis, there could be a possible decline in domestic worker migration. Okay, maybe I can explain a little bit later. And I would even venture to imagine that there could be a possible decline in irregular migration, given the border controls and given the various restrictions that would still be in place for some time to come. When we think about the future of labor migration, I think the routine approach is, how do we prepare for the recovery? But I would just like to end with another question. Instead of asking how could we prepare for the recovery, I would like us to imagine a Philippines without international labor migration. Okay? Because I think doing so would force us to think less about deployment, less about sending people out, but really thinking more and being forced to think about the reintegration of OFWs who are already here and whose numbers might increase. No? And then the second part of that question is really finding alternatives to international labor migration. Okay. So the search for alternatives to international labor migration is really beyond the mandates of migration agencies. It would need for a whole of society approach, and in thinking about and in implementing this whole of society approach, I hope that migrants would also be included in the discussion. And so I end with that for now. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Marla, for that very informative overview of the labor situation pre-COVID, during the COVID, and post-COVID, and you brought up a lot of questions to think about for the future, to consider in labor migration. So we'd now like to proceed to our third speaker. Yusek Rosemary Edilion is presently Undersecretary for the Policy and Planning Group of the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. She holds a PhD in economics from La Trobe University in Australia, a master's degree in economics from the University of the Philippines School of Economics, and a master's degree in statistics from the UP School of Statistics. Among her major responsibilities in NEDA is shepherding the formulation of the Philippine Development Plan, or the PDP, which is an elaboration of the country's priorities over the medium term and is the blueprint of government policies, programs, and projects. She also oversees the monitoring of the PDP implementation. In addition, she is in charge of providing technical advice on policy issues to both the legislative and executive branches of government, especially the committees of the NEDA board. Currently, she is the vice chair of the Economic Committee of the APEC and a member of the Philippine Commission of the UNESCO. She was also past president of the Philippine Economic Society. Yusek Edilion, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So is my audio clear? Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting the NEDA to this very relevant topic at this time of the pandemic, and happy to see my colleagues, see Alvin and also Marla. I've actually worked with Marla a long time ago, also on the issue of migration. So for now, I'll be discussing about the socio-economic challenges that the Philippine government now faces with respect to reintegrating our OFWs, especially given this COVID-19 pandemic. So first of all, I would like to share my screen. So are you able to see my screen? Okay, yeah. So the title of my presentation is Reintegrating OFWs Towards a Healthy and Resilient Philippines. So I have organized it along three portions. One is discussing the new normal, and the new normal for our OFWs, although this was also touched on by Marla and Alvin earlier. And then the proposed government interventions to address the needs of the OFWs. So first on the new normal. So I think, so this was back in May. Yeah, back in May. So NEDA actually already came up with this document, which is We Recover as One. And this is the output of the technical working group on anticipatory and forward planning. So this TWG was created by the IATF. I'm sure you're all familiar with the IATF on emerging infectious diseases. And our terms of reference at the time was really to address the loss in consumer and business confidence because of this pandemic. So this is actually an interagency committee, and there's 12 of us, and it was chaired by the NEDA. And the first thing we did was to brainstorm amongst ourselves what is the reason for this, the reason behind this loss in consumer and business confidence. And we came up that with the answer that the root cause really is, the immediate cause really is because of this increasing uncertainty. And so you have this two things happening. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think in our lifetime, this is the global pandemic that we have seen. And then we have the lockdowns. Again, if you did not live through the Second World War, so again, this is the first time we are experiencing these lockdowns. And so, and we figured that this uncertainty is really because, one, of the lack of information. There's so much we don't know about the COVID-19, about the disease. There's so much that we don't know about the ECQ. It was the first time we heard of the ECQ. And then, we always had questions. So when can we now go out? When will classes resume, etc., etc. So many uncertainty because of the lack of information. And so we think that that's the first thing that needs to be addressed, the lack of information. The next is many have actually experienced losses during the ECQ, especially those whose business depended on there being a crowd, there being a mass gathering. So those in the services sector, obviously, and of course, because we really, we went on lockdown, and that's the reason actually for the huge unemployment back in April. Next is, we always keep saying, so until when is this going to be? And we always say that, not until we get a vaccine. And then, of course, we know, like Marla said, that even after we have a vaccine, there's always that threat that there will be another infectious diseases. And therefore, we are really looking at a new normal. And so this document actually is also about preparing for the new normal. So it's in 3 parts, and it's actually uploaded in our website. You're welcome to please look through it. So just to go straight to the 3rd part of the report, which is the new normal. So we think that this is the general context of the new normal. 1, social distancing will still be observed. 2, there will be strict hygiene and sanitation protocols. 3, we're looking at sporadic lockdowns, hopefully very contained, very targeted. And then 4th, the looming COVID-19 threat, and actually health, will be foremost in the minds of many people. And for many, this could be paralyzing in and of itself. And therefore, that is that will be the new normal. What we did next was actually to tease out what this new normal means for the different dimensions using the PESTEL framework. So political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. But I will just discuss the economic, but pertaining only to the macroeconomy, and then the social. So with respect to the macroeconomic implications of this new normal, what will happen is in the immediate term, we will see a contraction in the global economy, perhaps until next year. I think for the global economy, the contraction will be this year, and a very slow recovery beginning next year. There will be tightening in the liquidity as balance sheets of households and firms deteriorate. Of course, because we asked them to go on lockdown, and therefore there was not that money coming in. There will be increased volatility of capital flows, and there will be a heightened risk aversion, particularly against emerging markets, of which the Philippines is part. There will be a slowdown in overall trade. And so overall, this one could actually impact on our on our domestic economy. So we're seeing contraction. So even just on the demand side, we are seeing lower global demand, lower commodity prices, and lower consumption as well. And so you're really looking at contraction in domestic economy. In fact, our initial estimate is that the economy will contract by 3.4% for the year. Next is, given this, then we're seeing a spike in the deficit to GDP ratio. So we have been keeping a lid on the deficit to GDP ratio ever since the previous administration. But this year and probably until next year, we will really see this spiking up. Now, this one is actually coming from the IMF, and this is still dated April. We do not yet have the May figures, so this one is already, slightly outdated. But as you can see here, everything in the red, that's actually their forecast for 2020. So you already have a world output. They're forecasted to decline by 3%. And in some countries, Malaysia, Thailand, there's already a contraction. For the Philippines, in April, they still see a 0.6% increase. But I'm sure this will now be revised downwards because, as you know, we didn't have a 1 month lockdown. It was 2 months, actually 3 months now and counting. So the social aspect of this new normal, then physical distancing will still be observed and implemented. There will be adjusted class schedules, so as you know that, and of course the delivery mode. Non-observance of traditional funeral practices and even traditional, social practices. There will be increased demand for health services and treatment, which is a good thing. But there will also be an increased need for mental health services. Unfortunately, we still don't think that the demand will be there, but the need is there, definitely. There will be increasing demand for social protection programs amongst displaced workers and vulnerable groups. We are seeing, of course, returning OFWs and many displaced workers. So the combination of these two is actually the one that is going to give us a lot of problems going forward. So these are the main challenges concerning OFWs amid the COVID-19 pandemic. First, this really is a massive repatriation of OFWs, and this is due to the pandemic, and then, of course, the expected global recession in 2020. So first of all, it's unprecedented levels. I'm citing a report here from the DOLE, and it is really covering the period from March 24 until June 14, and they said that at least 182,000 OFWs were displaced, and 34,000 have been repatriated. But the DOLE actually also reports that about 230,000 OFWs are seeking government cash aid. But for the entire year, they are expecting around 500,000 OFWs to be affected and losing their jobs abroad due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Next is the problem that has already been mentioned by Alvin and Marla, the bleak employment prospects upon their return because they actually compete in the same sectors as those that have been affected by the lockdown. So you're talking tourism, travel, retail, basic services, among others. When we did the We Recover as One document, we actually conducted 3 online surveys. So one of that online surveys, household survey, it covered 390,000, and we asked them, will they be traveling abroad once the ECQ is lifted? Will they be buying durables once the ECQ is lifted? And for the traveling, domestic and abroad, it's only 23% that said that yes, they will. And then for the durables, the ones who will buy durables, again, a huge majority, more than 70% said no. So that just tells you the level of optimism. Next is, of course, the surplus of skills and manpower, as not all workers can be employed amidst the social distancing measures. So even as we ease the restrictions, there will still be social distancing in the let's say in dining services, in recreation and leisure services. So all these things will also have a problem with respect to absorbing this excess labor. Next, we're also seeing increased vulnerability in the destination countries. So as of last count, about 6,000 OFWs have contracted the coronavirus disease and 400 actually have died as of June 14. So this one, I just want to show here the percentage of families receiving remittances from abroad back in 2018. So this is based on the Family Income and Expenditure Survey. Overall, around 30%, less than 30%, 29 point something percent of families receive remittances from abroad. So that actually is about 7 million families. So the region 1 has the highest proportion, almost 50% there. And then next will be region 2, about 42%, and then region 3. One of the lowest would be region 8. Yeah, and then region 5 actually is among the lowest percentage of families. And this is the latest as of 2018. Now, among those receiving remittances from abroad, the proportion of remittances received from abroad to total family income is about 26% on average. But the mean actually varies quite a bit if you go from region to region. So it goes from about 22% to as high as 27%. So we are actually, so these are really we are mindful of this statistics, and we are mindful that there could be some of this ripple effects because of the returning OFWs. Mind you, we're not yet seeing the drop in remittances. So first, there's obviously a lag in reporting, not only because of our lockdown here, but also, of course, because of the lockdowns in the other countries. So we cannot yet know how much this will be affected. But these are the government initiatives that have been done in order to assist the OFWs and their families. First is the DFA has been providing repatriation assistance since February. And then there's the Dole AKAP, where there is a one-time financial assistance of 10,000 per returning OFW. And then there's also the OWA program on the Enterprise Development and Loan Program. There's also TESDA's job matching and competency assessment certification and online skills upgrading and retooling programs. And then for returning OFWs, there was also the provision of free transport, temporary shelter, and then the provision of food packs. And then Dole also came up with this system they call the Oasis, and it's really to facilitate efficient and timely assistance. Now, this is the latest report, given to us. So as of May 19, these are the numbers that have been assisted by by the different agencies in government. So you can see that. Now, in the WeRow, the We Recover as One report, we have actually identified the specific strategies that we think should be in place over the short term. So one is we need to enhance government financial support and assistance for repatriated OFWs. So as you know, we do have this enterprise development and loan program, but we did not actually prepare for such a demand, a huge demand for this. So there really is a need to increase the budget for that. Next is to expand the absorptive capacity of OFW serving agencies. So many of this, like the reintegration program of the Dole actually has a it's not really adequately staffed. And if you have, just over 100,000 OFWs coming to ask for assistance, then that will be a big problem. Next is to facilitate the employment of repatriated OFWs. Of course, this was already mentioned, the retooling of skills and upskilling of returnees. Proactive job matching and competency assessment and certification. And then we're also tapping the DOST to expand their Balik Scientist program. So for those who can be actually brought into the research and development field, then they're very, very welcome. And then in the very short term, we're thinking that they can also be employed as we have the contact tracers, We have the national ID registrations, and then by next year, there's the conduct of the community-based monitoring system. Next is to enhance the health insurance and security for OFWs. Now this is going more into the medium term. First, this the ensure effective implementation of mandatory PhilHealth and SSS coverage amongst the OFWs. We're hoping that going forward and in very near forward, there could now be electronic payment services for these premium contributions. Pursuing bilateral labor agreements with the stringent welfare and protection provisions, social security arrangements, and emergency responses. And if it could be possible to include some health insurance in this bilateral labor agreements. And then, of course, increase the operating funds that will have to be provided in order to improve these programs for the welfare, health-related, and emergency response for OFWs. I just would like to share with you that actually, as I speak, we have been updating the Philippine Development Plan. So before our desired goal by 2022 is that we will have an inclusive, a high trust society, inclusive and a high trust society, globally competitive, and knowledge economy. But now we have changed this again, also because of the survey that we did. It's now for a healthy and resilient Philippines. So we want to come out of this better and stronger. It will still have the three pillars of malasakit, pagbabago, at patuloy na pag-unlad. But for the malasakit, it's now about building a high trust society. For Chapter 5, which is on governance, it's actually about ensuring people-centered, clean, technology-enabled, and responsive governance. And then for, let's say, Chapter 7 on culture, it's about promoting Philippine culture and values towards bayanihan. There are many other things here that, subtle changes that we have made, but it's really so that it could be more resilient. We could be more resilient with respect to government, that we could be more responsive, and then with respect to the businesses sector and also the economy, that they could be more agile. And then, and I think for this one, Marla will be happy because we now have a chapter on the OFWs, and it's about promoting the welfare and expanding opportunities for OFWs to contribute to the country's development. And like Marla has said, this is actually the ambition of every Filipino, matatag, maginhawa, panatag na buhay, where the first of these ambitions in the matatag is that family is together. So we are very conscious that this is really what is foremost in the minds of Filipino families. And so this is actually the long-term direction that the direction we're going towards the long term. Oh, by the way, take note that a long and healthy life is also part of the part of the ambition here. So kumbaga na fast track lang, na accelerate lang ang ating timeline for making sure that these ones really get realized. This is now the framework we're looking at for Chapter 21 of the Enhanced PDP. It's about protecting the rights, promoting the welfare, and expanding opportunities for overseas Filipinos to contribute to the country's development. And one of the things that we will be focusing really here is about this one, the OFWs, overseas Filipinos' participation in the country's development and reintegration in the Philippine society. We want to facilitate this. We want to engage OFs and their families and other stakeholders in governance. So, as I said earlier, actually all of this have been there in the mindset. It's now about accelerating the time frame of all this. And yung sinabi kanina ni Marla, think of Philippines with no more international migration. Yes, we are thinking about that. So, and that is where I end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yusek Edilion, for that very comprehensive overview of what government is doing in terms of its interventions for COVID-19 on the effect on OFWs. We'd now like to open the floor for questions to any of our three speakers or to all of our speakers. Maybe to start off, there's been a question that has been sent, and I'm not quite sure, maybe Yusek, would you want to start to respond to this? We are expecting a deluge of returning and repatriating OFWs. My question is, what role do local governments play in ensuring that our repatriated OFWs are successfully reintegrated in terms of 1, employment, 2, financial safety nets, and 3, travel back home? Would you care to give the first go at this?
Yes. We have always said that in addressing this problem that we have, we actually we need to have a phased approach. So right now we're at the response stage, and so with respect to the response stage, it's really about first making sure that they are safe, making sure that the receiving their families where they will go to will also be safe, and that is the reason why we're actually investing. Government is investing a lot with respect to the testing of the OFWs and the quarantine. Actually, a number of them are being housed in hotels, and some in quarantine facilities kasi dumami na masyado. And they're being quarantined for like 14 days before they are brought to their hometown. Now, LGUs, actually, there is very, very close coordination between the national government agencies and the LGUs. But we also need to understand that at this stage, many actually of the LGUs do not have the capacity with respect to health to address to a surge in health admissions, in hospital admissions, and that's also the reason why they are becoming many of them are actually over strict. They're even more strict than the national government, and so sometimes the OFWs, even after they finish the quarantine period, they're not yet allowed to go out. And in that case, national government are still accommodate them. So that is it. So there is that close coordination, but like I said, different LGUs would have different capacities to right away receive these OFWs. But I'm sure that to the extent, if only they can, then they will be able to accept them right away. With respect to the financial support, it's mainly national government. There's the OWA, and there's also the DOLE, AKAP, like I mentioned earlier, and there's also the OWA assistance.
So right now you're saying, Yusek, that really it's the national government that's taking the bigger role in terms of providing for the OFs, and local governments aren't really doing anything much in terms of maybe exploring possibilities for employment, possibilities, financial stability, etc. Okay.
Yeah. I think with respect to the assistance for employment, it's early days yet, so I'm sure that will come. We are actually going through the Bayanihan 2, and hopefully that will now be part of it.
Alvin, would you want to answer that as well? What is the role? What could be the role of local governments?
Well, most of the OFWs that have left, at least in the last 5 years, they have passed through the system in the local peso system. So at least they have a knowledge of who have left and where they are. And if they're coming back, at least they would have known how much they had contributed back to their hometown. So siguro what would be critical at this point is to find the LGUs themselves should be the one to provide some kind of internal acceptance sa pagbalik ng mga OFWs nila. But it's really as Yusek Rose said, it's not easy right now because what you need right now is to make them safely go back. So that's still part of national and local coordination. So once things are settled, I think that is the time where the LGUs have to start finding opportunities for their returnees. If they don't want if there's no opportunity to go back, what are the existing local opportunities for them?
Okay. Maybe we can go to the second question, unless Marla has any other inputs.
Yes.
Yes, please, Marla.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe just to add a little bit, I think we also have to take into account that at this point there are few LGUs that have migration institutions. There are few LGUs that have a specific desk to address migration-related issues. Although in many parts they're using the pesos as the ones in charge of migration-related aspects. I think what we also need to consider is that I think we have to provide support to LGUs. We have to provide more capacity building as well as resources so that they can also they will be in a better position to address the concerns and needs of their citizens that are returning to their localities. So yun nga, my coordination, but then at the same time also providing them with support and resources that would help them address the needs of the returning OFWs. Thanks.
Thank you. Another question addressed to you, Marla. Given your questions on thinking without labor, the future without labor migration, to what extent is the Philippines manufacturing and agricultural sectors ready, able and effective to provide these alternatives to overseas workers and dollar remittance incomes? How ready is our manufacturing and agricultural sectors to provide the alternative employment and incomes?
Yeah, I will have a very quick answer. I think in terms of the manufacturing sector, maybe not much in that regard, because that sector is a very shrinking sector in the Philippines. Unless we think of unless I think this pandemic should also alert us that there is a need for us to produce certain products and services locally. I think there should be a lot more efforts and a lot more resources that have to be given to that particular part. As to agriculture, agriculture is always a potential, and there's a great deal of potential in agriculture even before the pandemic. It's just that there's not much interest, I think, in terms of investing in agriculture. And actually, we did a study a year ago looking into agriculture as a possible alternative for our young Filipinos. And the findings were not really that surprising. Many young people are not that interested really in agriculture, and that's one of the challenges of the sector, because we know that the farmers in the country are aging. But what we have also argued in that study is that actually we found young people who are interested in agriculture, but not necessarily in the production aspects. There are people who are interested, for example, in developing financial access of farmers, and linking farmers with capital. There are efforts by young people of linking farm products to consumers, but these are not yet at a scale that, I mean, most of these are I think like startups. They're not really at a scale that that most people would probably consider very significant, but nonetheless, I think they are promising. So I think with this pandemic, I think this pandemic is also making us realize, Filipinos in general, about the value of the agriculture sector. It's putting food on our table. And there is actually an initiative on the part of the Department of Agriculture offering loans to repatriated OFWs. So we hope that this could also be a start of OFWs and also non-OFWs to consider agriculture as something that we can really develop, and to think of agriculture in terms also of value-added processes, to think also of support to agriculture, like maybe investing in post-harvest facilities and so forth, and maybe part of the value-adding contributions could be like, what do we do with excess produce of tomatoes and various farm products that can actually that can actually be made into other products as well, that can be transformed into other products. So maybe we need to expand our idea also of what are the opportunities in the agriculture sector beyond food production even if it's a very important part of our food reliance, self-reliance on food. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Marla. Maybe,
Yeah.
Alvin, can I ask you if you want to add anything, given your interest and work in agriculture as well,
Mm.
as well
Yeah,
as
of course,
manufacturing?
yeah, I agree with Marla, because really we really have a big potential in agriculture. But the thing is, the way we approach agriculture is it's a big thing, agad, mabilisan agad. I think one of the things we are missing in the agriculture context is its connectivity with nutrition, with the health requirements of our nation. So, and one of the, I think maybe some of you have seen it. I wrote an article last week in the Mirror, Business Mirror, Agriculture for All, which calls for agriculture that is local and that thinks local. So that means the what we want to recommend basically is that we don't want farmers to think of the markets outside first. Think of the local markets. Think of what are the needs of the communities para hindi malaki yung expenses, hindi malaki yung capital na kailangan agad. And later on, when the needs of the communities are met, you solve the nutritional challenges, you solve the food requirements, local food security, then the excess now you sell. So we will not have this excess tomatoes because you were producing it for a market very far away from the locals. So the locals cannot eat all the tomatoes that you have. So parang ganyan, no? So it's a way of thinking small in the agricultural sector and thinking local. But at the same time, kung madami siya, then it's one way to start. I have been listening to a lot of OFWs right now are listening to webinars on agriculture, but many of them want immediate agad yung harvesting. No, agriculture is not a simple business. So that's why the call that I'm working with some of the farmers who I've talked to, make it local na lang muna, small, address small needs, survival ng communities, and then pag may sobra tsaka tayo magbenta sa labas. Kasi if we go malakihan kaagad, then we have already seen the problem. We had the lockdowns, then may output but you cannot bring it to the markets. So that kind of mindset. Becky, baka si Yusek Rose may masasabi
Yes.
dyan.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you. Yes. We
Yusek.
for the resiliency plan, we're actually looking at 4 or actually 5 priority sectors. First is health systems. So we're talking about health infrastructure, human resources for health. We're talking about having a national CDC and regional CDC. We're talking about having more of this virology, the laboratories, and so that we could produce our own vaccines, our own medicines. The other priority sector is the digital infrastructure. Well, obviously, there are also some policy issues there that will have to be addressed. But like I said, these are already on the drawing board. The third one is the agri-food supply chain. So you have actually, hit it right on the nail when you said that it's not just about producing the food; it's really about bringing it to the market. So we want a supply chain approach. So agri-food supply chain. We still need those the non-food agricultural products to the extent that they actually form part of the essential products. And then the fourth one is actually on construction, which is also crucial for the supply chain, crucial for connectivity, and also because we're thinking that we really need to improve our settlement infrastructure, the quality of our housing and settlement, and so that will be another priority sector there. And then the fifth one is actually peripheral to all of this. It's really about the education sector, because we really need to produce the workforce of the future. We're really talking about massive retooling, reskilling of everyone, including the teachers, because obviously it's really now a new normal. So all these are actually will be in the resiliency plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek. Can I ask another question from you? This is Can you comment on the mandatory OFW PhilHealth contribution, which OFW is clearly opposed? Can you say anything about that? The mandatory PhilHealth contribution.
Yeah, I think this has already been addressed by the president himself, no? And then actually, as of now, beginning yesterday, there's actually an oversight hearing on the implementation of the universal healthcare, and these are one of the things that are on the table. I think the intent is good, in fact, because it's really to address the vulnerability. It's a way of social protection on the part of for OFWs and their families. It's just that the timing is wrong, and I think also with respect to the payment protocol that is being asked from the OFWs, that they have to pay so many months in advance all at once, no, and that's why we said that they should actually first have the systems for improving this payment protocol, and so many other things that needs to be improved first, and then before we get into this even.
Okay, thank you. There's a point here and a question as well. I think be addressed to Alvin. Very good point on the issue of returning OFWs offered entrepreneurial activities to replace their income. In a way, this stopgap measure will only cause great anxiety and even income loss. Professor Alvin correctly mentioned that in the past, OFWs were heroes hauling in cash when the country needed liquidity. The question now is exported labor still going to be lucrative as COVID-19 is everywhere? Maybe we can ask Alvin and Marla to answer this.
Well, I think we already answered that in a general sense, there are only very few markets that are open right now that are hardly hit by the COVID. So there might be a time lag before overseas work will be viable again. So that's why I think just like what the resiliency plan of NEDA already is taken into consideration, we have to take a look at the local opportunities where the skills, the experience of the OFWs can be harnessed locally. My challenge lang doon is that we always think na they can do business. I think that's not very easy to do because business is very difficult. So I think skilling and maybe a de-skill. So if a professional lost a job, baka wala siya makuha professional work, maybe de-skill muna. Just like what the OFWs did in 2008, 2009. No? They did not come back home, but many of them de-skilled in the Middle East.
That's right.
Engineer, nagiging electrician, nagiging but then they retained their overseas work. But now we don't have that opportunity. But locally, we can probably try to have some kind of adjustments there. Baka massive retooling is required because as we already noted, the jobs that are lost are the same jobs that are being lost here. So very difficult yung opportunities dito. So there had to be some kind of massive. I think the TESDA is already doing that. Pero siguro looking at the exact sectors that we want to see immediately big channel growth to the economy, yun po siguro yung training na kailangan.
Any other comment, Marla, before I ask each of you to give your last words? Yes?
Yeah. I think what we have to watch out for what we have to watch out for is the situation of our OFWs who are still abroad. No? Kasi kung lalala pa yung sitwasyon, there could be the possibility that there will also be salary cuts for local workers in the countries where they're working, and then that would also affect them as well. So kung magkakaroon ng salary cuts dun sa mga destination countries, what would be the value added of working in another country if they're also going to work at the very low salary level? So I think we have to watch out for that possibility. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Tina, if I may just add,
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, please.
yeah.
Say.
No, just also to give context also to some of these discussions. Actually, when we were discussing, I think last year, about our employment prospects for this year and then 2021, we actually were kind of worried because this year and next year will be a time of very tight labor supply in the Philippines. This was pre-COVID, and this is really because of the K to 12. Because for this year and then next year, we will not have any college graduates except those who overstayed. Okay, and this is really because of the K to 12. Our first batch of K to 12 actually graduates in 2022. So if only we can get back our economy going again. Of course, there's also the problem of the tourism establishment, some other sectors that will really have to be repurposed. But for the most other sectors of the economy can just be brought back online, and there will be job openings for our repatriated OFWs. Because like I said, it's supposed to be this next 2 years, it's supposed to be a period of very tight labor supply. That was pre-COVID. So at the moment, now we have that situation where imagine these are skilled workers that are coming into the labor market. And that's why we are really very, very keen on, first of all, improving our health system's capacity. Because all of these things that we are talking about, it will actually all just fail if we cannot address our health problem. So if we can address our health system's capacity to address this problem, then, there's that confidence, and, all the other business sectors can begin functioning again, and there will be employment opportunities for our repatriated OFWs.
Thank you, Yusek. That sounded quite optimistic and positive. A little bit to add. I mean, amidst all these negative situation and scenarios we've been hearing. Anyway, we'd like to give each of you 2 minutes to sort of wrap up and give your last comments. May I ask Alvin to start off?
Okay, thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to share our thoughts on migration and remittances. Indeed, we are facing a very challenging situation, but as Yusek Rose is saying, it's not without hope. We can plan for it. There are opportunities that are available, but yun nga lang, we have to do a lot of work. And it's not only the work of government, it has to be work. Everybody must put in their effort in this. So siguro, in the next 3 months, ganito pa yung situation. But hopefully, we're looking and asking God to intervene. Some of the countries that are holding many Filipinos becomes better, then we don't have to send them all back home here muna, and then we can prepare. And it's good to hear that there's now going to be a full chapter on OFW, so we can really address the needs and meet not only theirs and their families, and then prepare for their eventual return and for that future that Marla is thinking of. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin. Please, Marla.
So thanks once again for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'd also just like to say that, yes, I think part of our reality up until maybe the end of the year is really the return of our of overseas Filipino workers, and the kind of return is distressed type of return, because a lot of them will be unprepared, and it's a sudden interruption of their overseas employment. So I think we have to brace for that. And in a sense, maybe what we are hoping for, that they can contribute to national development. Maybe initially, we have to provide support for the people who are coming back under very difficult conditions. But this pandemic has been very disruptive to societies all over the world, and it's a very life-changing experience for us at the level of individuals. But as many people also say, and something that I also believe in, this is also an opportunity for us us to build the kind of society that we want, no? Not just to be happy with what we have, but it gives us an opportunity to think through a lot of things and to really entertain the possibility that maybe we can build something better. So,
thank you. You said
Yes,
yes,
so
please.
yes, thank you, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you also for taking this initiative so that we can begin this discussion. Really, it's a very important topic. It's also a topic that's close to my heart, and like Alvin has said, this is actually beyond government. This is actually ano yung sabi ni ano, mega crisis. Yung sabi ni Marla. This is really
Buka.
something that this is really something that is beyond any one sector, and truly we will heal as one. We need the contribution of each and everyone. The private sector has been very superb. We've had actually even the academe, we have been engaging with them in the data analytics part of this pandemic. And it would seem that it's not just the quantitative people that we can actually tap, but also the social scientists. And we continue to be, we continue to want to be part of the discussion. And we heal as one, we will recover as one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as in most webinars, it's always difficult to stop a conversation that has been very interesting. And while we really have to go, I think it's important to say that this has been a very fruitful, productive 1.5 hours of sharing on what has been happening to our overseas Filipinos, especially our OFWs, and how the pandemic has really affected them, especially socially and economically. And while a lot of negative scenarios have been presented forward, especially during this COVID and post-COVID, and what will probably be for the rest of the year, we are still, it's really also good to hear that there's a lot of challenge. Yes, there are challenges facing us, but also some positive directions, positive light, positive possibilities that have yet maybe to be evolved and discussed. And that's what the three of you have mentioned. I think this is maybe what also has to be focused on, not just, of course, the immediate urgent needs of our OFWs and their families for support when they return and maybe for their loss of employment, etc. But also what will happen in the future, 5 years down the line, if, as Marla was saying, it may take 5 years for this pandemic to disappear or may not altogether disappear, as there may be other pandemics that will also, what do you call this, emerge. But it does provide us an opportunity to rethink and reimagine what could happen to the Philippines without so much labor migration, and therefore needing not just government and maybe academe and NGOs to think about it, but a whole of society approach, as what you said, Marla, really also bring in the migrants themselves. So hopefully there will be another opportunity to have such another a similar conversation, hopefully looking more into the future, 5 years, 10 years hence, for the situation of our OFWs. So thank you once again. Thank you to all our viewers, and we thank the Academic Crisis Response Consortium again for having organized this special webinar. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.